Ladies and gentlemen, by the power vested in me, I hereby constitute this assembly as the legal congregation of the University of Pretoria. During this assembly, degrees with all the associated rights and privileges will be conferred on the candidates whose names appear in the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Ladies and gentlemen, we now request you to join us in silent prayer or meditation to give thanks for the achievements of our students. I thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, graduates, I am the Vice Principal Academic at the University of Pretoria, and one of my duties is to officiate at graduation ceremonies. And it is my signal pleasure to welcome you to this afternoon ceremony to celebrate the achievements of students in our Faculty of Humanities and the Faculty of Veterinary Science. Ladies and gentlemen, allow me to extend a special word of welcome to our Registrar, Professor Caroline Nicholson, the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Vasu Reddy, the Dean of the Faculty of Veterinary Science, Professor Vinny Naidu, the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Sandy Africa, the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Veterinary Sciences, Professor Marinda Oosthuizen, the Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Veterinary Sciences as well, Professor Dietmar Holm, the former Vice Principal of the University of Pretoria, Professor Anthony Melk, former Deputy Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, Professor Henny Stander. Chairpersons of school, heads of departments, directors, emeriti, and honorary professors and other lecturers and their spouses are also here with welcomed. We also welcome the representative of the Student Representative Council who will present the SRC academic honorary colors. Furthermore, we welcome all persons to whom degrees will be conferred this afternoon. And finally, we welcome all spouses, parents, and other parties, as well as dignitaries whom we may not be aware of. Ladies and gentlemen, this year marks the centenary, the 100th year of the existence of the Faculty of Humanities at the University of Pretoria. I wish to make use of this opportunity to congratulate the Faculty of Humanities with this achievement. This year, too, our Faculty of Veterinary Science enrolled students in the BVSC program for the 100th year. And next year, this faculty will be celebrating its centenary. Allow me at this point already to congratulate the faculty for their centenary next year. Ladies and gentlemen, both the Faculty of Humanities and the Faculty of Veterinary Science have made enormous strides on the QS, Times Higher Education, and other ranking systems, and they currently rank amongst the best internationally. Indeed, the Faculty of Veterinary Sciences is ranked amongst the top 50 veterinary science faculties in the world on both the QS and Shanghai ranking systems. Consequently, ladies and gentlemen, I wish to make use of this opportunity to commend both the Faculty of Humanities and the Faculty of Veterinary Sciences for their hard work and dedication, which have resulted in their very favorable rankings internationally. Ladies and gentlemen, today's graduation ceremony is one of 10 graduation ceremonies scheduled for the 2019 spring graduation period. During this period, more than 1,500 degrees and certificates will be conferred. Of these, 162 are doctoral degrees and 452 are master's degrees. This in effect means, ladies and gentlemen, that for the academic year 2019, UP would have graduated some 14,000 students. Today we are conferring 141 degrees from the Faculties of Humanities and Veterinary Sciences. Of the degrees to be awarded today, 21 are doctoral degrees and 78 are master's degrees. Ladies and gentlemen, the qualifications that will be awarded to our graduates today are extremely valuable. These qualifications will give them access to opportunities that many of their contemporaries will not have. Because the vast majority of today's graduates will be obtaining postgraduate degrees, I want to briefly pause to consider the value of postgraduate qualifications in contemporary society. Of course, in the discussion to follow, I do not wish to create the impression that the achievements of those who will be awarded bachelor's degrees today have less value. On the contrary, all the qualifications that will be awarded today have significant value. Moreover, obtaining a bachelor's degree is an important criterion for entry into the world of postgraduate studies and the world of work. Graduates, my apologies. I'm sure that that as you were approaching the completion of your studies, many of you may have asked yourself the question, what value will this new postgraduate qualification have? I'm also sure that for many of you, the obvious first answers to this question are of an intensely personal nature. Specifically, I'm sure that for many, completing an honors, master's, or doctoral qualification signals the achievement of an important personal goal. Furthermore, I'm sure that many of you realize that completing this qualification means a lot to those who had supported you during your studies. Of course, your completing this qualification also means a lot to the university. The university takes enormous pride in the achievements of its students because it is through your achievements that the university can continue to cement its standing as one of the foremost universities on the African continent. I remind you that the University of Pretoria has significantly improved its position in the latest QS rankings. Indeed, the University of Pretoria is the only South African university to have improved its rankings on the system this year. Ladies and gentlemen, it should be noted that the University of Pretoria produces more doctoral and master's graduates per annum than any other mainstream traditional South African university. And your completing your qualifications will allow the university to further entrench its position as a leading university in South Africa and on the continent. Of course, the degree that will be awarded to you today will have value for you in other important respects as well. For example, it should significantly improve your position in the world of work. While employment certainly can no longer be guaranteed in an increasingly complex and competitive employment market, recent research shows that the postgraduate qualification significantly improves your chances of finding meaningful employment. Increasing numbers of people are obtaining undergraduate qualifications, so in order to stand out, a postgraduate qualification will become increasingly important. In my opinion, it is largely because of the large numbers of postgraduate students who graduate from the University of Pretoria that this university ranks amongst the top 1% of all universities globally for graduate employability. Ladies and gentlemen, in times of financial turbulence and uncertainty, personal income becomes increasingly important. And research shows that people with postgraduate qualifications are more likely to access higher skilled jobs and therefore earn better salaries than people who do not have postgraduate qualifications. Indeed, in an article that appeared in the World University News in April of this year, it is reported that the income for young postgraduates rose 4 times as fast as salaries for graduates in the past year, which suggests that young graduates need a postgraduate degree to become high earners. Research indicates that postgraduate qualifications also increase career mobility and career options, of course. Now, apart from giving you high-level research skills, postgraduate studies ideally also lead to the acquisition of a wide range of other transferable skills that are highly valued in the employment market. Postgraduate study requires, as you no doubt know, high levels of self-discipline, self-management, and self-motivation, as well as time management and organizational skills. Furthermore, since postgraduate students generally conduct highly complex and intricate research, they invariably encounter various obstacles. Dealing with these obstacles enables them to develop their problem-solving and critical thinking skills. These are skills that are highly sought after by employers currently. In a 2016 publication titled The Future of Jobs, the World Economic Forum argues that, and I quote, "The evolution of job markets and in-demand skills are changing at an accelerating rate. This means professional versatility and agility are becoming imperative. In a future where technology dominates, however, Those skills that are distinctly human will be among the most valuable, and it is these skills that are enriched through postgraduate study. Close quote. Last but not least, because of the specialist knowledge that they acquire and produce during the course of their research, postgraduate students are more likely than others to influence public opinion and policies. Because of this, as an author at the University of Sydney argues, people with postgraduate qualifications are more likely than others to shape both the world we live in as well as the future. Ladies and gentlemen, all of us here present will agree that this ceremony represents a culmination of much hard work and sacrifice on the part of those who are graduating. So my sincerest congratulations to everyone who will be awarded degrees today. Congratulations for having stayed the course. Congratulations for having reached the goal of successfully completing the programs for which you had enrolled. And of course, congratulations to your parents, guardians, partners, sponsors, and others who had supported you materially and in other important ways during the period of your studies. Finally, I wish to congratulate and express my sincere thanks to those who had lectured the candidates who will be receiving their degrees today. Ladies and gentlemen, if I can pause here for a short while, I want to mention that every single person who will be walking across the stage will enjoy, of course, celebrations from our side as well. We really are incredibly proud of every single student that had completed their studies. But I do think that we need to make special mention of the people in the red gowns, in other words, those who will be receiving PhDs. Ladies and gentlemen, to give you some idea of what it means, I would want you to, along with me, add up the number of years invested in their studies to get to this point. Everyone who sits here and will be awarded a doctoral degree, of course, had to do their first degree, the B degree, BSc or BA, whatever the case may be. They had to work extremely hard. Obviously, try to complete the qualification within 3 years. For some degrees, it's 4 years. They had to score exceptional marks in order to be given access to the honors program. Before they get admission to the honors program, they have to work hard and they have to attain a certain percentage. Once they have access to the honors program, once they enroll there, they have to make sure that they get extremely good marks in order to enroll for the master's program. Generally, for most departments, it varies between 65% and 70% to get admission to the master's program. The master's program takes approximately 2 years, and you work under the supervision of an expert in your field, but they guide you. Even though you are doing independent research, you have someone who assists you along the way. And then you have to score very well. You have to have a very high score in order to be given access to the PhD program. Generally, most departments expect at least a 70% before they will give any person access to their PhD program. And then begins the real work. I mean, prior to that, how many years have you spent? 3 years, 4 for the honors, and 2 more years, 6. Before that, you had worked very hard, but you had always been accompanied by someone. For your PhD, you are required to work independently. It's a lonely and solitary job. And you have to work incredibly hard because you have to become the specialist in the field that you are studying in. Many people while we say that we don't expect anyone to complete a PhD within less than 3 years, many people take 4 and 5 years. So you add that up. So on average, most people take 10 years before they complete their PhD. So this has been a very, very long road for them. And of course, the work that you produce has to be exceptional. It has to be accepted by both your supervisor as well as international experts before you are awarded the degree. So when the people in the red gowns cross the stage, remember the years they have spent in honing their craft and also the intellectual prowess that had been required. And now, ladies and gentlemen, I request that you join me in applauding our graduates for their significant achievements. And graduates, I now request you to applaud your parents, partners, and others who had supported you during your studies. We are cognizant that without those who support us, our achievements would not be possible, or they would be worth much less. Graduates, ladies and gentlemen, All that remains for me now is to wish you well as you join our nearly 270,000 UP alumni and start a new chapter in your lives. As you forge your way further in life, please remember your alma mater, the University of Pretoria. Remember the UP Way, and remember the UP Scholarship Fund when you become rich and famous. Graduates, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your attention. And I now request the Dean of Humanities to introduce to me the candidates present whose names appear in the program.
Mr. Vice Principal, the supervisors will introduce the doctoral candidates.
Thank you.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Ms. Bonnie Neen, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Literature with a thesis entitled The Desiring Girl and Young Adult Fiction, prepared under my supervision. In her thesis, the promovenda critiques the representations and lacunae in the portrayal of teenage girls' sexual desires in young adult novels that facilitate either the opening of a cultural discourse of girls' desire or its dangerous silencing. Informed by cross-disciplinary perspectives and autoethnographic life writing, this daring and groundbreaking analysis uncovers a tendency to construct girls' desire as doubly wrong. Not only are heroines commonly represented as the wrong gender for desire, but South African heroines are also constructed as inhabiting the wrong country, bisexual heroines as liking the wrong objects, and conspicuously breasted early developing girls as possessing the wrong bodies. Nevertheless, her study concludes that some lesbian-focused novels, nuanced interrogations of desire, and exceptional works that directly evoke desire, engaging with what is sexy about sex, may indeed open a necessary discourse of girls' desire. The promovenda's examiners unanimously and enthusiastically praised this research and strongly recommended its early publication.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Patrick Cronin Linehan, who has complied with the requirements for the degree of Doctor of Literature with a thesis entitled A Study of Pringle's Sonnets, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovendus focused on the body of sonnets in the oeuvre of the Scottish-South African poet Thomas Pringle. Referring to the new formalism, he recovers a sense of the craftsmanship inherent in Pringle's work, integrated with a profound understanding of the historical and literary context of British Romanticism and colonial rule. The thesis reflects the trajectory of Pringle's art from the intimate mode of sensibility to a more publicly oriented Miltonic Wordsworthian position, which manifested in resistance to the curtailment of freedom in the Cape Colony and ultimately in a robust engagement with the international anti-slavery movement. This is substantiated by a detailed formal analysis and what one of the examiners called a profound depth of learning. By following a method which demonstrates the influence of the form on the way Pringle chose to shape his experience poetically, as well as the way Pringle's experience modified the form, the promovendus makes a significant original contribution to Pringle studies and to sonnet studies as such. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Albert Olatunde Oloruntoba, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Literature with a thesis entitled The Negotiation of Gender and Patriarchy in Selected Nigerian and South African Plays, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the Provendus examined the work of selected African feminist playwrights from South Africa and Nigeria, the works of popular Nigerian dramatist Ahmed Yerma, and those of South African playwrights Fatima Dike, Tulani Mchali, Mutal Naidu, and Nadia Davis, were studied with the aim of bringing two distinct literary traditions into dialogue in order to clarify understanding of how gender is inscribed across different contexts. The Provendus explored the extent to which these plays align with the often polarized discourses of Western and African feminisms, thereby contributing to a broader understanding of gender and gender-based oppression in African contexts. The study of Ahmed Yerma's work revealed the playwright's primary allegiance to the more accommodating, inclusive, and non-confrontational styles of African feminism, while an analysis of the South African plays suggested their closer alignment with more radical versions of Western feminist praxis, defined as a struggle against patriarchal hegemony. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidates.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Renias Ngara, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Music with a thesis entitled Kayanda Musical Arts for the Installation of Shangwe Chiefs, an epistemological, gendered, symbolic, interpretive, community state model for sustaining tangible and intangible heritage in Zimbabwe, prepared under the supervision of Professor Meki Nzewi. In his thesis, the Promovendus studied the current model of installing chiefs in order to assess its potential to promote the preservation of their musical arts heritage, which is facing challenges of gradual extinction in rural communities. The thesis aimed to examine ways chiefs were assigned the responsibility to reclaim, promote, and preserve musical heritage in the areas of jurisdiction. He began by outlining and examining the indigenous model of installing two Shangwe chiefs in the Gokwe North and South districts. He then presented and analyzed the attitudes of community people towards the participation of state in the installation of chiefs. He also outlined challenges faced by chiefs in their attempt to preserve the musical arts heritage in their areas of jurisdiction. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Pauline Beletta, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy, with a thesis entitled Equine-Assisted Object Relations Psychotherapy for Adolescents with a Diagnosis of Conduct Disorder, an exploratory study. The promovenda investigated the use of an object relations theoretical approach to psychotherapy in the context of equine-assisted psychotherapy. The use of animal-assisted therapy has been growing for several decades and is particularly valuable when working with individuals who struggle with verbal expression of their problems. The unique contribution to this field lies in the fact that a psychodynamic approach has not previously been researched in this context. The promovenda drew on her own experience in working psychotherapeutically with highly disturbed adolescents in institutional settings, including the correctional services. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Carline Erasmus, who has complied with the requirements of the degree Doctor in Philosophy in Psychology with a thesis entitled Family Processes of Families of Adolescents Diagnosed with Epilepsy, prepared under the supervision of Professor Terry Bakker and with Professor Nafisa Kazimji as co-supervisor. In her thesis, the promovenda explored the family processes, coping strategies and experiences of 15 families with an adolescent diagnosed with epilepsy. The study employed a mixed method design comprised of standardized scales, interviews subjected to thematic analysis, and graphic family sculpting as reporting by the patients and family members. The research revealed that male patients cope better than female patients. Younger patients had lower adaptability skills and family satisfaction than the older cohort. The patients generally functioned better than their families. There is a need for support in family relational skills and knowledge about epilepsy. The study concludes that support for these patients, families, significant others, and treating medical specialists may assist South African adolescents and their families in coping better with their diagnosis. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Beatrice Icheria, who has complied with all the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled An Investigation into Food Security Among Female-Headed Households in Kenya, a case of Voi division in Taita Taveta County. In her thesis, and prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Bila as co-supervisor, in her thesis, the promovenda investigated food security among female-headed households in Voi division from an ecological systems perspective and according to Sustainable Developmental Goal 2. The quantitative phase of this mixed method study used a questionnaire, household dietary diversity score, and food consumption score to determine food security. Energy-dense and staple foods scored highest, while proteins and fruits scored lowest. The overall food security status was found to be mild food insecurity. The qualitative phase demonstrated food security statuses through interviews with key informants, observations and photographs. The demand for food superseded supply, use of food aid was very high, while own food production was low. Food security status was influenced by rural-urban nexus and socioeconomic status. The study recommends multi-agency and community collaboration to ensure food security. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Nicholas Hendrik Jacobs, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctorate of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Digital Acting, Actor Training for Digital Visual Effects, prepared under the supervision of Professor Mark Munro and with myself as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus developed and empirically determined the efficacy of a digital acting program for the film actor working with digital visual effects filming techniques. He defined digital visual effects, indicated how the various techniques impede an authentic performance, and argued the lack of and need for an effective empirically determined approach to such an environment. He investigated neuroscientific principles pertinent to an embodied performance and demonstrated how these principles assist in developing the identified skills. Informed by these principles, he aligned existing action approaches and, in context, developed the digital acting program. He empirically assessed its efficacy through pre- and post-recordings of active participants performing in a green screen environment, which indicated a positive shift in performance for the experimental group. The study concluded that this positive shift, in conjunction with reflective journals from the acting participants, provide evidence of an effective digital acting approach. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Isedra Creer, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Breastfeeding Skills of Neonates with Hypoxic Ischemic Encephalopathy, prepared under my supervision and with Prof. Lydia Pottas as co-supervisor. The promovenda investigated a challenging neonatology research question from a speech-language pathology perspective. Hypoxic ischemic encephalopathy, a life-threatening condition originating during the first hours after birth, shows a high prevalence in South Africa. The first comprehensive description of breastfeeding difficulties and oropharyngeal dysphagia in a substantial sample of neonates with a mild to moderate form of the condition was provided. Given the importance of breastfeeding and breast milk for all infants, a significant original contribution was made. The study introduces the findings and implications of feeding difficulties in this population of neonates to local speech-language therapists and those practitioners working in similar contexts. 3 publications ensued from the research. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Emerentia Leonard, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled An Employee Assistance Program for Small and Medium Enterprises in Windhoek, Namibia, prepared under my supervision. Excuse me. In her thesis, An Employee Assistance Program for Small and Medium Enterprises in Windhoek, Namibia, the promovenda highlighted the significance of access to an EAP for employees working in the SME sector. The review of the literature led to the exploration of needs for SME owners, employers, and employees using semi-structured interviews. The outcome of the needs assessment provided input for the development and implementation of an EAP guided by EAP core technologies and EPA-SA standards. She started by exploring and assessing the personal and work-related problems experienced by employees and SMEs that impact on their productivity and existing ways in which those psychosocial problems were addressed in the past. Through an evaluation of the EAP, the promovenda established the value of EAPs for SMEs, where the scores hitherto had been on the operational and economical matters with very little focus on employee psychosocial well-being. Overall, the study highlighted the need for an EAP for SMEs, taking into account the uniqueness of small and medium enterprises. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice-Chancellor, I introduce to you Marcus Melk, who's complied with the requirements for the degree Doctorate of Philosophy in History with a thesis entitled Eine andere Heimat, A Different Home, a biographical narrative of South African Germanists, 1864 to 2014, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis, the promovendus analyzed the growth of a distinctive German South African identity spanning 4 generations of the Behrens family. The Behrens family's experience was used to document the origins, the growth and decline of arguably South Africa's most prominent German community during the 20th century, the farming settlement of Kroondal. Informed by the Kroondal community's conservative desire to retain its culturally German identity, the Behrens family provides a minority perspective of South African history. The external examiners lauded the thesis for the contribution it makes to the otherwise underrepresented field of South African historiography. The thesis concludes that Kroondal conservatism served to divorce it from the increasingly liberal sentiments of the post-war West German public, leading to the inevitable erosion of Kroondal's self-identification to the notion of Germanness. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Stephen Mananganankarimeng, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Peronyaki Shushia Khopoluya Balatia Spedi, an in-depth investigation of a Sepedi Palat, prepared under my supervision. In his thesis Peronyaki Shushia Khopoluya Balatia Spedi, the PhD candidate focuses on the investigation of the accurate description of a ballad and whether there are written poetic texts of this type in Sepedi, focusing on the visibility of the structure of a ballad to differentiate it from other types of poetry by looking at Humanities and Feller's poems. The investigation adds that the Sepedi ballad is indeed related to the other genres, epic, narrative, heroic, and praise poems, and their appearances are interrelated. Thus, the description of these concepts show more similarities than differences. It is therefore not surprising that authors of those different text types in Sepedi confused or combined characteristics of those text types when they wrote ballads, epics, narrative, heroic, and praise poem. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Mrs. Juliet Sambu, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled A Holistic Social Work Intervention Program for Women Survivors of Human Trafficking in South Africa. In this thesis and under my supervision, the promovenda explored the needs and challenges of these women. The study outlined the intense trauma these survivors experience on a physical, sexual, psychological, economic and social level, and confirmed that South Africa lacks knowledge about the consequences for and needs of women survivors of human trafficking. There is also a lack of an effective holistic social work intervention program to attend to the needs of these survivors. The absence of such a program in South Africa means that professionals who are working in this field are not always sufficiently equipped to render an adequate service. Against this background, the researcher designed and developed a holistic social work intervention program for women survivors of human trafficking. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce you Lodwo Siame, who has complied with the requirements of for degree Doctor of Philosophy with the thesis entitled "A Critical Analysis of Submitted to Governing Authority," found in Romans chapter 13, verse 1, amongst some Pentecostal preachers in Zambia, prepared under my supervision and Professor Van Eck. In his thesis, A Critical Analysis of Submitted to Governing Authority, found in Romans chapter 13, verse 1, among some Pentecostal preachers in Zambia, the promovendus explored the role ordinary citizens in Zambia play in keeping their political leadership accountable by investigating how African Pentecostal preachers in Zambia use biblical text in a democratic dispensation. The theoretical perspective of enchanted worldview and field of consciousness were used to explain the lack of distinction between religion and politics. By interpreting Romans chapter 13, verse 1 to 7, from the chosen perspective, the promovendus observes that adherents of these churches tend to be passive and that they resort to prayer as a solution to governance-related issues. The study concluded by highlighting the dangers of an enchanted worldview towards democracy and good governance. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Daniel Wilhelm Jacobus Smit, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled Reconceptualization of Management Plans for Protected Areas in South Africa, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Howard Hendricks as co-supervisor. In his thesis, the promovendus analyzed the effectiveness of management plans as part of the effective management of protected areas in South Africa and its SADC neighbors. In this unique study, he used various instruments to measure the way in which management plans complied with the minimum legal requirements, to establish how management plans were implemented, and to identify the areas in the management plans that needed to be changed to be an effective management tool. He incorporated the results of the evaluations of the existing approved protected area management plans, the results of the questionnaire, and the findings from the interviews in the existing model of management plan to create a reconceptualized management plan that will assist protected area managers to comply with the legal requirements and to implement management plans with an increased level of success on a day-to-day basis. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Stephen Simons, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy, prepared under my supervision and with Professor Nick Shepherd as co-supervisor. In his thesis, Shadows Asking an Echo to Dance, Navigating Ambiguity, How Former Conscripts between 1980 and 1990 navigate memories of induction into the South African Defence Force in post-apartheid South Africa. The promovendus navigated memories of induction into the South African Defence Force in post-apartheid society, providing fresh insights via multi-methodological means into the construction of militarized masculinities, memory, and whiteness during apartheid. According to his examiners, the promovendus thesis works against the erasure of history by insisting that all histories of a contested past are valuable. He calls for the ending of silences, often expressed as counter-memory, resisted generalizations, and recommends an acknowledgement that differences in memory and experience defy easy conclusions in the present. The promovendus relied on interviews with ex-SADF conscripts, articulating their narratives by means of two major exhibitions. He showed that interdisciplinary methodologies may be of relevance to transitional contexts elsewhere, where ex-conscripts or veterans continue to seek means of reintegration into the society they call home. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Mwamba Chimpaka, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis entitled People-Centered Approaches to Regionalism, Southern African Civil Society Networks and SADC, 1989 to 2016. In his thesis, the promovendus worked out a typology of the institutional arrangements developed by regional civil society groups in their interactions with formal and self-organized forms of regionalism. He revealed that regional civil society networks that are part of the dominant formal process of regionalism exhibit different strategies, norms, and rules for those that emerge out of the contestation with or in opposition to formal regionalism. He demonstrated that regionalism can be viewed as an unconventional socio-political phenomenon that can also be promoted by non-state actors like the Southern African civil society networks in the SADC region. This implies that if well-governed, self-organized regionalism can also function equally well as formal regionalism driven by state actors and technocrats. The promovendus contributed to the literature on contemporary regionalism by expanding the focus of analysis to include non-state actors. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Anushka von Meck, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy in Creative Writing with a thesis prepared under my supervision entitled Vet en Fiksie, 'n Fokaldiaanse kritiese diskursanalyse van die liggaamsbeskouing van die vetsugtige protagoniste in uitgesoekte hedendaagse Noord-Amerikaanse vetfiksie. Mr. Vice Principal, the English version of this citation is available on page 28 of our program. In haar proefskrif ondersoek die promovenda die gebrek aan kritische ondersoek na die aanwesigheid van protagoniste in vetfiksie. Het hulle 'n stem? En indien hulle 'n stem het, wat word gesê? En hoekom sou dit van belang wees? Sy ondersoek 5 Noord-Amerikaanse romans, wat elk gekies is om 'n bepaalde faset van lyfbeskouing te illustreer, waar 'n vetsugtige protagonis in stryd is met sy of haar liggaam. Aan die hand van Michel Foucault se konsep blik, gaze. Die promovenda kom tot die gevolgtrekking dat die samelewing se angsvalligheid oor die eens abnormale, naamlik vetsug, wat nou die normale word, lei tot 'n duidelike stilte in letterkundige navorsing. Die navorsingsdeel van hierdie kreatiewe skryfproefskrif is aangevul met die manuskrip Vir wie die jas pas, wat handel oor die wedervaringe van 'n vetsugtige protagonis. Al die eksaminatore, sonder uitsondering, het aan hierdie proefskrif die hoogste lof toegeswaai. Mr. Vice Principal, I request that you confer the doctoral degree on Anushka von Meck.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate. Okay.
Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Arts in African Languages, Masibidi Setaka. In Ancient Languages and Culture Studies, Ludwig Sutton. In Audiology, Bianca Brevis. Lizelle Eilish. Shantae Venter. In Augmentative and Alternative Communication, Wanamashiane Motapo. In Clinical Psychology, Mbalenhle Marulen. Cameron McConaughey. In Clinical Psychology, Rafia Mangera. Moitswadi Moloto. In Counseling Psychology, Meridian Mawelele. In Diplomatic Studies, Lindy Minele. Mark Reinhardt. Wendy Swartz with distinction. Jared van der Westhuizen. In Drama and Film Studies, Danae Janse van Rensburg, with distinction. In English, Christian Nodia, with distinction. In English, Marianne Muriti, with distinction. In Environment and Society, Life Mashlaule. In International Relations, Gumulemo Murane. In Linguistics, Susanna Hoffman. In Research Psychology, Robin Murray. In Security Studies, Maram Mahdi. In Speech Language Pathology, Melissa Da Costa. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Arts in Fine Arts, Marilee de Weert. Teboho Lebakeng. Isabel Marks. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have all complied with the requirements for the degree Master of Diplomatic Studies, Tobeka Josie. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Music, Music Therapy, Renelle Hauptfleisch. Annalette Prinsloo. In Performing Art, Simon Petrus du Toit with distinction. Misha Melk with distinction. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Social Work, Elmi Pretorius. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Social Work, Employee Assistance Programs, Rivalani Mabunda. Tendani Malange. In Healthcare, Megan Hosking with distinction. Ilani Kriel. Soarelo Matetwane. Jeffrey Nkachisang. Noxolo Zwane. In play-based intervention, Vera Alexander. Katerina Hoos. Danelle Liebenberg. Emily Walton with distinction. In social development and policy, Lekopo Lelope. Mamoraka Mokhale. Onika Mokwape. Tapelo Salim. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Social Science in Anthropology. Teboho Moswane with distinction. In Development Studies, Bernadette Mendez. Tsepang Mohulatsi with distinction. In History, Andile Bam. Nobunkwele Mbem. In Industrial Sociology and Labor Studies, Tsepo Kwetsa. In Sociology, Mumi Mashika. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Arts Honours in English. Janine Westhuizen with distinction. In Political Science, Neo Kwakwa. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Arts. Alaysa Kasim. Linda Chibanda. Damian Clausen. Charles Comley with distinction. Shante Krokamp. Selaelo Lamola. Kutso Letsualo. Macholane Maila. Nomalongelo Nzuza. Winnie Sitole. Jason Stiff. Carrie Streeter. Jessica Forster with distinction. Esmery Watson. Terrell Willis. In law, Darian Blair. Lerato Malachi. Olubocheng Mokhomotsi. Thank you. Thank you. Zitulele Nkumalo. Thank you. Solomon Shabangu. Lee Ray White. In Sport and Leisure Studies, Sport and Leisure in Society, Nicholas Bilderman. In Sport and Leisure Studies, Sport and Recreation Management, Jürgen Boysen. Christine Boswell. Marius Mostert. In Sport and Leisure Studies, Sports Psychology, Musa Makubela. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Political Sciences in Political Studies. Melusi Masina. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Social Sciences in Industrial Sociology and Labour Studies, Blake Boulay. Terence Chirenje. Ruben Nell. In philosophy, politics, and economics, Shudufatso Musida. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Bachelor of Sports Science, Cameron Morgan. Walter Ungara.
I now request the Dean of Veterinary Sciences to introduce to me the candidates present whose names appear in the program.
Mr. Vice Principal, the supervisors will now introduce the doctoral candidates.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Agatha Kolu, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Detection of Zoonotic Bacterial Pathogens in Multiple Hosts Using a Microbiome Approach, a Molecular Characterization of Anaplasma phagocytophilum, prepared under my supervision and with Dr. Nicola Collins and Professor Kelly Bright and his co-supervisors. In her thesis, she investigated wild rodents, dogs, cattle, and their ticks as possible sources of zoonotic pathogen infection in the Manisi community, Mpumalanga, South Africa. Using a microbiome sequencing approach, an array of bacterial pathogens were detected, including several zoonotic agents. The rodent microbiome was dominated by Bartonella species, while Anaplasma species dominated the dog and cattle microbiomes. The acute febrile illness patient blood microbiome was dominated by Rickettsia africae. Sequencing of the 16SR RNA and GLIT8 genes confirmed the presence of Anaplasma phagocytophilum DNA in humans, dogs, and rodents, thereby providing the first report of the detection of the zoonotic agent in South Africa. Overall, the study highlighted the significance of the zoonotic agents found as possible contributing cause of non-malarial acute febrile illness in this community, and it recommends that they be considered by healthcare practitioners in the differential diagnosis of acute fevers. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Francis Skolo, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Prevalence and Characterization of Brucella Species in Slaughter Animals in Abattoirs in Gauteng Province, South Africa. Prepared under the supervision of Professor Henriette van Rierden and co-supervised by Professor Adisuyun and Professor Fasina. In his thesis, the promovendus analyzed retrospective data from National Laboratory for Brucellosis Diagnosis and reported a 5% seroprevalence in cattle. He investigated the occurrence of Brucella antibodies in cattle, sheep, pigs, and humans at abattoirs, and characterized the isolates of Brucella species for the first time in South Africa. The study isolated Brucella melitensis, biovars 2 and 3 in slaughter cattle, and the occurrence of Brucella antibodies among abattoir workers using serological bacteriological and molecular methods. These findings suggest a potential food safety hazard to consumers of undercooked meat and a zoonotic risk to abattoir workers. The study recommends the inclusion of abattoirs in the brucellosis control scheme, and information from this study can be used to monitor change or formulate policies to mitigate the challenges posed by brucellosis in livestock and humans in the country. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, I introduce to you Maputi Betuil Dwawa, who has complied with the requirements for the degree Doctor of Philosophy with a thesis titled Optimization of Detection Techniques for Brucella abattoirs in South Africa, prepared under the supervision of Professor Henriette van Heerden and co-supervised by Dr. Crawford and Dr. Ndunengo. In her thesis, the promovenda optimized the CETA medium for the isolation of the Brucella species from South African field samples. The medium was used to isolate Brucella abatus and Brucella ovis strains in collaboration with the veterinary labs. In addition, serum samples were used to develop an in-house indirect ELISA with the recombinant fusion protein AG for multi-species detection of anti-Brucella antibodies. Comparing the performance of this assay with the commercial IDEX ELISA kit resulted in a significant correlation between both assays, with the kappa and the payback values of 0.6 and 0.9 respectively. The promovenda also generated 14 sequences from the isolated strains, and analysis of these sequences showed that the majority of the recently isolated strains are genetically similar to the isolates from 1983 and 2017. Identical genotypes were also detected on more than one farm, which might be the results of uncontrolled migration of animals from unknown infected herds. Mr. Vice Principal, I request you to confer the degree on the candidate.
I hereby confer the degree Doctor of Philosophy with all its associated rights and privileges on the candidate.
Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidates have complied with all the requirements for the degree Masters in Veterinary Science: Gillian Taylor. In Anatomy and Physiology, Carmen Murray. Mr. Vice Principal, the following candidate has complied with all the requirements for the degree Master of Veterinary Medicine in Small Animal Surgery: Elizabeth Bester.
Graduates, I want to make use of this opportunity to once again congratulate you with your achievements. We know that you had worked very, very hard to reach this point. And in fact, I want to once again invite the audience to give you a warm round of applause for your achievements. Please remember that your alma mater is very proud of your achievements. Ladies and gentlemen, we have now come to the end of the proceedings. Before we close, I wish to invite all present for refreshments afterwards in the aula foyer. You are requested to stand for the singing of the national anthem and to remain standing until the assembly has been dissolved and the academic procession has left the auditorium. The words of the national anthem are printed on the inside back cover of the program. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise. Ladies and gentlemen, by the powers vested in me, I hereby dissolve this assembly of the University of Pretoria.
So